Hi, I'm David from Tramex Meters. Today I'm at RTI and we're talking about our Moisture Encounter 5. This is the Tramex Moisture Encounter 5. This meter also has Bluetooth, which is located there to turn on the Bluetooth to connect to the Tramex Meters app. And this is probably our most popular moisture meter. It's non-invasive and it's multi-materials and dual depth. The top scale that you see in the traffic light colors is the wood timber scale. So this is to be used on any wood, and again, non-invasive. So you can take a non-invasive reading and get an actual moisture content number on the wood scale. Now, to adjust for different woods and different specific gravities, you can refer to the user guide. The meter has a default setting for Douglas fir. When you switch to the different settings on the meter, you're understanding that you're now coming off of this wood scale and using the bottom 0 to 100 comparative scale. Now, the interesting thing is the second setting is shallow depth. So all of these other settings on the meter, the wood timber, the drywall roofing, the plaster tile, and the masonry, those are making a scan of about 1.25 inches into the material. So on the shallow depth setting, it's just scanning about up to 3/8 of an inch. So you're automatically have the opportunity on this meter to compare a shallow reading to a deeper reading in any material that you're working with. Now, this shallow depth is calibrated based on the wood scale. So keep in mind when you're using the shallow depth on wood, it is giving you a percentage of moisture content reading based on the top scale there. Now, when you use that shallow depth in any other material, you're going to drop to the comparative scale. And why this is important with this meter is because on the comparative scale, it's always important to first establish your dry standard. The dry standard will set your 0. In this case, on the shallow depth, we would consider that reading of 20 as our dry standard and compare other readings to that known dry number. Now, we can do this in all the different settings. Drywall, which you'll see has 3 dots next to it, the plaster tile 2 dots, and the masonry 1 dot. Now, what those different dots are just indicating is strength of signal based on density of material. So obviously drywall is not as dense as plaster or tile, which is not as dense as masonry. So this is on this type of setting where it's 1 dot, it's going to be a stronger signal for a more dense material. In all of these settings, from drywall, plaster tile to masonry, keep in mind you're using the bottom scale here. Again, comparative scale. So on these materials, it's important to establish your dry standard. Or you find a dry spot, take a reading, and again, like here, that becomes your 0. And you'll compare other readings to that number, not to the 0. So it's important to understand that this meter in a comparative setting, it's not like reading your watch, because you first have to establish what those numbers mean by knowing a dry standard. So here we're looking at linoleum over a plywood subfloor. So I've set the meter to the 3rd setting based on just the density of material. And we've established our dry is about 30. So when I see, I have a little elevated moisture here. So this area I'm looking at 54. My known dry spot over here was 30, so I know that this area here has an elevated moisture. Here's a setting where we're using the ME5 on tile over concrete. So I'm going to start out in the shallow depth, and I've taken off the beeper because we're using this comparative scale now. We're not using the top wood scale. So this beep, which is dictated by this scale, is not going to mean anything to us, so I've gone here and turned off the beep. So we're looking at shallow depth currently, and I'm looking on my app to see the numbers in digital form. So we're seeing
right up around 60 as our number on shallow depth. And then we can compare that to the plaster tile setting since we're on tile. Now this is looking deeper. The shallow depth was only looking about up to 3/8. Now we're looking up to 1.25 inches. So we're taking a bigger scan, including the subfloor, the concrete slab subfloor. And you can see we're getting elevated moisture here. This is an area that was experienced some water. So we are getting indication that the numbers are high. So in this area here, as we move to the door, again, we're on the tile setting here, and we're getting the meters maxing out at 100. As we get closer to where the tile ends at the door, we see it going down a little bit here, and then here where there's an actual crack in the tile where the moisture has found a place to come out, we can see it's down to 37. So there's our comparative reading here, 25 right in that area. So we do know that the rest of this area does have elevated moisture still. Here's a situation on hardwood where we can use the X5 here on the left with a pin attachment to take a quantitative reading of the moisture content in the wood, and you see we're coming in at 7.1%. So now if you have a large area of wood to scan, it's easier to use the ME5 compared to the reading on the X5. So you see on the wood setting we're at 12. So we've established that 12 is equivalent to 7.1, our dry number, and now we can continue to scan the rest of the wood quickly using the ME5 in the wood setting. Here's an area where we're going to use the ME5 moisture meter to test the drywall for elevated moisture, and we're scanning from top to bottom, so we want to hold the meter horizontally so we get a reading that's correspondent with the moisture line we're trying to detect. So we take a reading here towards the top of the wall, again on the drywall mode, watching the meter and going down on the wall to see where we find a spike in the moisture. And we can see here as we go lower, we do actually see a spike in the moisture compared to the dry standard that we established towards the top of the drywall. One thing to be cognizant with the ME5 is that metal will spike the meter. So we can see here as we reach a corner bead, the meter spikes. Thanks for taking the time to learn about the ME5 with Tramex and RTI.